Hello, this is a new YouTube channel that I've decided to create most recently, but this has been an idea that I've wanted to try for many years now, and the content of this channel will mostly revolve around ideas from Western and Eastern philosophy, but applied to modern day context and situations that you may find funny. That's where the name comes from, Goober Philosophy. Um, it is my vision that you will find these videos helpful in navigating the world and then maybe also laugh at just the context that I create. I'm hoping that this channel can take off, but if you're wondering what the hell you're watching or listening to, that is where I'm going to start. So yeah, I don't want to get too much further into the introduction, but being that this is the first time I've recorded for this channel, I just wanted to kind of lay out a vision of what I see this channel being. And as I've found in life, what you visualize as the ideal versus what it actually turns out to be can sometimes be slightly different to drastically different. But the goal and sole purpose of this channel is to just share my ideas in a more casual format than if it was written or something like that. But yeah, so I guess we could start to get into the first topic that I wanted to talk about on this channel. Um, I have a few ideas here, so I'm just trying to decide which would go first. But maybe we could start with the concept of the path of least resistance and how it can be deceiving. So, in my experience, doing, um, or how to put this, doing something that is worth doing, uh, sometimes doing something that's worth doing, you want to do what's easiest, right? So, when you, for example, have let's say the SATs, and they teach you to handle the questions that you know first, and then come back to the questions that you don't know how to answer. And this is an example of the path of least resistance. This is kind of a silly example, but it's what first came to mind. So, say you're taking the SATs back in high school and you're in the math section, and some of the questions are easier to answer. Those are what SAT prep strategies tell you to do first. So, if you can get the algebra questions done quickly, do that. If it's geometry, do that. But whatever your strengths are, people always suggest that you handle what's the least challenging. So you can, because every question is worth the same amount of points in this example. So people always say, oh, well, do what's easiest. And then when you have time, because that's really what it gets down to, is that we don't have um, unlimited amounts of time, but there's unlimited amounts of problems, it seems, in the world to solve. So some people might look at the SATs in the same fashion where they say, okay, um, I know algebra and I know x equals 36 or something. Like I don't know what the problem might be, but if you're good at that kind of problem, you would go tackle that first. You would then proceed to the next easiest question and so forth. This is an example of the path of least resistance versus going to a problem that you have no idea what the solution is, how to get there. It could take you 30 minutes. You only have 20 minutes per section, let's just say, to finish this. So it would be a waste of time to tackle the most difficult problem first, and therefore going with the strategy of the path of least resistance might get you the best SAT score that you can get. Now, obviously, you want to answer all the questions if you want a perfect score, but very few people get perfect SAT scores. So you have to kind of contend with what is possible versus what is the ideal. And this is the idea of going with the path of least resistance, doing what is within your means to get you the best results with the reality that you're given. Not everyone has a great math ability. Some people are more um, stronger in the logic section or the English section. Everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and that's what really sucks about life is that, you know, sometimes we don't even know our strengths and weaknesses, but we try to go with what seems most attainable, and this is what the path of least resistance would say to do. Um, what's deceiving about the path of least resistance, though, as I've gotten older, is what I find is sometimes it's not so obvious what that path is. So I've seen circumstances in my life where um, I take the path of least resistance, but later on I realize because I took what seemed easiest, because I did what to me would have led to the best results, it actually leads to worse results. And this is kind of like the conundrum that I'm trying to focus on today, where um, sometimes what seems like the path that is least resistant in the moment is actually going to lead to more problems in the future. So it's not always going to be like an SAT exam in life. There's not always a clear-cut way to get to a solution like that. Sometimes, for example, let's take weightlifting. So weightlifting to me is where you're actually purposely going up against what's most resistant. But in the process, you develop muscles, you develop a discipline, you develop tools in your arsenal that help you be more resistant to life because you've gone the path of most resistance. And that's what's interesting to me about people like David Goggins. I listened to his audiobook and I've read parts of the same book, and I think pretty much his whole view on life is take the most resistant path, or some, I think it was a poet or someone said, the path least traveled. That to me is an interesting way of looking at life, where instead of saying, hey, like that SAT example, I am going to handle what I can handle easiest first. David Goggins might look at the SAT and be like, go after the most difficult problem. Um, Screw time. We're just going to get this thing done. I'm not really sure how he would tackle the SATs. I don't know if he even took the SATs, but if he did, I'd be curious to see what his strategy for SAT exams are. But that's kind of, like I said, a silly example, more applicable to life. I think what David Goggins is trying to tell people is if you can handle something tougher than your worst challenge in life, then your worst challenge in life becomes way easier and there's way less resistance in that type of strategy. And I find this fascinating. So basically, like I was trying to use in the gym example, if, instead of, let's say, trying to think of the workout where you work out your delts. I think it's called like delt fly or whatever. So basically, a lot of people lack shoulder strength that go to the gym. They might focus on the main muscles like biceps, triceps, chest, maybe legs, but there's like ancillary muscle groups that actually a lot of people don't work out, such as the delts, like the interior, exterior delts, and so forth. And that's probably one of my biggest weaknesses is my delts. And I've been focusing in the last year on strengthening that through, like I said, delt flies or Arnold press or, military press. There's a bunch of ways you can increase your delt strength. But I think what David Goggins has taught me when I listen to his audiobook is that you should focus on the things that you struggle with the most, because then it kind of like transitions into other parts of your life in a positive way. So now that I've focused on my delts, I'm going back to focusing on bench. And I think this is really the crux of his philosophy. Take the most resistant path, because now I think my bench is doing much better than had I neglected the delts. If you neglect things in life that challenge you the most, I believe that you're actually putting yourself at a disadvantage, and you're not tackling the real problem at hand. You could say, oh, I did all this in this year, but if you didn't tackle the thing that you struggle with the most, none of it really feels that satisfying, and none of it really feels like you really achieved much. So you have to, I think, in the David Goggins view, you have to go against what scares you the most and honestly what you think you're going to fail at the most, And if you surprise yourself, because I think a lot of his work is talking about pushing your body further than you think you can go. I think, that's a really powerful tool if you can harness that, because we tell ourselves, oh, I can't run this mile or I can't run 5 miles. But if you run, over 5 miles, running 1 mile becomes really easy. Tackling challenges at work that you don't think you can attain become much easier because you said, I've already done something more difficult. So I really do like that philosophy of challenging yourself and going up against the grain, and instead of taking the path of least resistance, taking the path of the most resistant, but also achieving your objective. And then when that all comes to be, um, sometimes the path that's most resistant turns out to be the least resistant path, because otherwise you might get into more trouble if you don't tackle what's challenging you the most. Hopefully that made sense. I'm going to review this recording. And like I said, if you're wondering what the hell this is, I'm still trying to figure that out too. But yeah, you've stumbled on a new podcast, or not a podcast, you've stumbled on a new YouTube channel. And hopefully this stuff is helpful. If this is just not helping people, or I feel like, maybe I could work on, the content. I will make edits and we'll see how far this channel goes. But thank you for taking your time to listen to this rambling of mine, and hopefully you found it helpful. See you.